Here's the expanded script with roughly 300 additional words woven organically into the body, mainly in the emotional high points, the kiss scene, the pregnancy scene, and the finale, where extra depth adds the most value, plus a slightly richer opening hook. Every classic show hides secrets nobody was ever meant to see. Some get cut because they run too long. Others get cut because a network executive got nervous. And a few get cut for reasons so strange you will not believe they were ever filmed in the first place. Star Trek has been making television and movies for almost 60 years, which means there is an entire graveyard of footage sitting in vaults, warehouses, and old film canisters that most fans have never laid eyes on. Some of it was destroyed. Some of it was simply forgotten, tucked away in a storage unit, until someone finally thought to dig it back out decades later. Today we are digging through that graveyard and pulling out 10 scenes that never made it to your screen. Some are funny. Some are heartbreaking. And at least one of them was blocked by network censors for being too controversial for its time. Stick around, because number one on this list involves a secret that could have completely changed how millions of fans first fell in love with two of the most iconic characters ever created. Let's start at number 10, and it might be the funniest thing we found. Captain Picard is famous for being calm, proper, and completely in control of his emotions at all times. He does not yell. He does not curse. That is simply not who he is. Except there is one film scene cut from the movie Star Trek Insurrection, where Picard comes about as close to losing it as we have ever seen him. In the version that made it to theaters, there is a small joke where Riker tells Picard that Starfleet has ordered a top-level review of a shady operation happening on a nearby planet. Picard just sort of shrugs it off, since by that point he has already saved the day anyway. But in the deleted version, that same line gets delivered to Picard much earlier, before anything is resolved, and his reaction is nothing like a shrug. He snaps back with real anger in his voice, telling Riker that a review means nothing, and that he will not allow any kind of cover-up. It is jarring to watch, almost like seeing a completely different character. So why was it cut? According to the film's co-producer, the studio felt the ending needed more excitement, more explosions, more punch. So the writers reworked the finale, moved that angry line over to Riker instead, and turned it into a joke rather than a moment of fury. One tiny decision about who says a line completely changes whether it feels funny or furious, and it shows just how much power editors have over how we remember a character. Staying with that same movie for number 9, there is a romance that almost went a lot further than fans realized. Insurrection gave Picard something the franchise almost never bothered with, an actual love interest. Her name was Anij, and she belonged to a peaceful people who had discovered a way to slow down time itself. In the finished film, there is a beautiful scene where she slows time around the two of them so they can share a quiet moment while the rest of the world moves normally around them. It is romantic, but it stops just short of anything more. What most fans never knew is that 2 separate kisses between the pair were actually filmed and then removed before release. The first happened during that slow motion sequence with water droplets and even a hummingbird frozen in midair around them. According to the film's producer, the crew worried that stopping for a romantic moment felt wrong when the scene was technically happening during an emergency evacuation, with the rest of the crew rushing to escape danger just moments earlier. The actress who played Anij later admitted she was caught off guard when she learned both kisses were gone, since actors tend to build their entire performance around scenes they assume the audience will actually see. She described the slow-motion sequence as something closer to a quiet, sensual exploration between the two characters, full of small touches and lingering glances that built naturally toward the kiss itself, which made losing its sting even more once she saw the finished cut. Watching the surviving footage now, it is easy to understand both sides. On paper it sounded beautiful. On screen, surrounded by frozen water and blinking eyes, it ended up feeling a little more strange than romantic. Number 8 takes us to a character who almost never got any kind of love life on screen at all. Captain Archer spent years commanding a ship without much hint of a personal life outside his job. That nearly changed during the second season finale of Star Trek Enterprise. In the deleted footage, Archer walks through the streets of San Francisco not long after Earth has been struck by a devastating alien attack that killed millions of people. The city feels quiet and shaken. He ends up at a nearly empty restaurant, greeted warmly by the owner, who lets him know that someone named Becky has already arrived. The two clearly have history together. They share an easy, comfortable conversation, followed by a kiss, and a bit of playful teasing about whether Archer will get invited back to her place. The scene was ultimately cut simply because the finished episode ran too long, and something had to go. The actor who played Archer even said at the time that he hoped the character might return once the crew eventually made it home, suggesting the relationship could have shaped where the show went next. Here is the detail that ties it all together. According to the official novelization of the episode, Becky's mother was the original breeder of Porthos, Archer's beloved pet beagle. Porthos came from a litter of 4 puppies, each one named after a character from the classic novel, The Three Musketeers. The most famous dog in the entire franchise has a secret connection to a romance that almost nobody even knows existed. Number 7 brings us to a birth that almost opened one of the most important Star Trek movies ever made. Most fans only know one version of how Spock came into the world, shown through a strange vision inside an older film. But a completely different version of that same birth was filmed for the 2009 Star Trek movie, and it nearly opened the entire film before being pulled. In the unused footage, a newborn's cries echo through the desert city where Spock's Vulcan father lives. A human mother, clearly meant to be Spock's mother Amanda, lies with her newborn son while the father arrives home just afterward and gently suggests naming the child after an important figure from Vulcan history. Pieces of this scene actually slipped into early trailers before the film's release, so a few sharp-eyed fans caught a glimpse of footage that would later disappear completely. Filmmakers eventually decided the scene felt repetitive once placed next to the other childhood flashbacks already built into the story, so it was trimmed for pacing rather than for any lack of quality. It is a strange feeling, knowing that the exact moment your favorite character was born once existed on film, and almost nobody has ever seen it. At number 6, we finally get an answer to a question fans have been asking for decades. Jean-Luc Picard speaks with a crisp, proper English accent, despite being born and raised in France. Fans joked about it for years without ever getting a real explanation, until a deleted scene from the Star Trek Picard series finally addressed it directly. In the unused footage, shot for the very first episode of the show, Picard walks through his family's vineyard in France with his dog. At one point, he notices 2 of his vineyard workers mocking a woman who lives and works on the property, and he switches into fluent French to defend her without a second of hesitation. It is a small moment, but it hints at an entire side of the character audiences almost never got to see. Interestingly, the actor who plays Picard actually tried using a French accent decades earlier, back when the original show was first being cast, but the description of the character at the time only called for a French tone to appear when emotions ran high, and that idea eventually got dropped altogether. The show finally gave fans a real explanation years later, revealing that Picard's family survived a war by hiding beneath their vineyard before eventually fleeing to England, which is where his branch of the family picked up their English accent. It took the franchise more than 30 years to answer that question, and this deleted vineyard scene nearly got there first. Number 5 is one of the most emotional deleted scenes on this entire list. Captain Kirk spent decades commanding starships, but one film sequence shows him attempting an extreme stunt that almost opened the movie Star Trek Generations. In the footage, 2 of his old crewmates stand on the ground staring up at the sky, watching their friend attempt an incredible skydive from space itself down to the planet below. When he lands, one of them reports that Kirk missed his exact target by a small distance, delivered in an oddly serious tone. What makes the scene hit so hard is a quiet detail buried in the conversation. It becomes clear that Kirk has refused to set foot on a starship ever since retiring from Starfleet, which makes his eventual return to duty later in the film feel far more meaningful once you know what almost never happened. The director explained that the sequence got cut simply because it made the opening feel too heavy and slowed the story down before the real plot even started. Even so, the scene did not disappear completely. It eventually surfaced as a bonus feature on a special home video release, inside the official novelization, and even in a comic book adaptation. Interestingly, the actual skydiving costume built for this scene did not go to waste either. It was later reused for an entirely different stunt performed by a character on Star Trek Voyager years afterward, giving one small piece of unused costume design a second life on a completely different show. At number 4, we find a scene that quietly ties together two of the most powerful moments in franchise history. This one comes from Star Trek Nemesis, and it involves a private conversation between Picard and his android officer Data, sharing a glass of wine from the family vineyard we mentioned earlier. The actor who played Picard once explained that this scene was meant to touch on everything that eventually matters most in life: change, loss, friendship, and family, and that its meaning would only become clear once you reached the final act of the film. He was right. Later in the movie, Data sacrifices his own life to save the crew, and in the aftermath, Picard raises a glass and repeats an old toast to absent friends. That exact same toast was spoken decades earlier by Kirk himself, mourning the loss of Spock in an entirely different film. The deleted wine scene was quietly setting up a callback. Most viewers never even noticed. Years later, when Star Trek actually released a real bottle of wine under the Chateau Picard name, the back label included a line lifted directly from this forgotten scene, proving that even cut footage can leave a permanent mark on the story's legacy. Number 3 takes us back to a hidden talent that almost got buried along with the film reel it was shot on. Before she ever stepped onto a starship bridge, the actress who played Lieutenant Uhura spent years as a professional singer, touring with a well-known band early in her career. In one classic episode, her character sings a haunting song to comfort a lonely crew member over the ship's intercom. The actress later described the recording session as something almost magical, saying she deliberately lowered her voice to give it a warmer, richer sound. Decades later, when a special anniversary Blu-ray set was finally released, fans discovered an alternate, extended take of that exact performance, one that had never been seen since the day it was filmed, complete with an entire additional verse that exists nowhere else. It is a rare case where cut footage did not just survive, it actually improved on the version everyone already knew and loved. Number 2 might be the most controversial entry on this entire list, and once you hear the story, you will understand why it never made it to air. In a classic episode where the crew encounters a being claiming to be an ancient Greek god, that character becomes fixated on a young officer, and the story ends with her heart broken as he fades away. But the original script went much further. In a fully filmed scene, the ship's doctor pulls the captain aside and reveals that the officer is pregnant, and that the child's father is the godlike being she had just lost. The line closes with a haunting question about what kind of child might result from such a union. That twist survived every single draft of the script, and the creative team genuinely loved it. But network censors ultimately refused to let it air, since a pregnancy resulting from a relationship outside marriage was considered far too controversial for television at the time. What makes this even harder to believe is that the crew had already filmed almost everything else for the episode by the time the network stepped in, meaning actors had to be called back just to shoot new, watered-down replacement dialogue for a storyline they had already treated as final. The scene sat completely unseen for nearly 50 years until it finally resurfaced as part of a documentary feature decades later. The actress who played that role came back years afterward just to talk about how strange it felt revisiting a storyline that had been hidden away for almost her entire adult life. The idea never fully disappeared from the story either. One novelist kept the twist alive in an official book adaptation shortly after the episode aired, and years later another writer built an entirely new character around a descendant of that very storyline, proving that even a censored idea can quietly survive if enough people refuse to let it go. It makes you wonder just how many other emotional character moments were quietly erased before anyone ever got the chance to see them. Which brings us to number 1. And this might be the deleted footage with the biggest emotional impact of them all. The 2009 Star Trek movie gives us quick glimpses of young Spock and young Kirk growing up, Spock dealing with bullying because of his mixed heritage, and Kirk growing up without a father. Both stories feel a little rushed in the final film, almost like the movie wanted to slow down and tell us more, but kept getting pulled back to the main plot. It turns out that is exactly what happened. Several additional childhood scenes were filmed and then quietly removed before release. One in particular shows Spock's human mother having a real disagreement with his Vulcan father about how their son should handle being bullied. She wants him to embrace his Vulcan heritage, but she also insists there is nothing wrong with him acting human sometimes too, even if that just means walking away from a fight instead of standing his ground through pure logic. It is a small, quiet scene, but it says so much because audiences almost never got to see Spock's parents disagree about anything, especially something as personal as how to raise a son who never quite fits into either world. One respected film critic who studied this deleted footage years later pointed out that it shows just how close Spock stayed to his mother growing up, which makes her eventual death later in the story hit far harder once you understand what was cut. He even admitted that while trimming most of these scenes probably helped the film move faster overall, this particular one probably deserved to stay, since it added real emotional weight without ever slowing the story down. So there you have it, 10 deleted Star Trek scenes that almost changed everything we thought we knew about this franchise. Some of these cuts made the final product stronger. Others honestly feel like a real loss. Which one do you think never should have been cut? And if the studio let you bring back just one forgotten scene forever, which one would you choose? Let us know in the comments. And if you enjoyed digging through this hidden footage with us, make sure to subscribe for more stories the cameras almost let slip away.